So here are these snares on their own. Like I was saying, a real characteristic generally of the type of music is that these snares have huge reverbs on them. Now, like I was saying, I could spend ages trying to sort of work it out with a reverb to try and get the characteristic I want, but I've done it with white noise instead. Now, I don't really know, if you're familiar with that kind of music at all, but that's kind of the sound that you're trying to achieve by doing it. So what I've actually done to set that up, so basically I've got a white noise signal running the entire time. I won't subject you to it because just hearing white noise is pretty horrendous. But I've got a white noise signal running the whole time. So on a MIDI channel, I've just set up Ableton's operator, which is one of their synthesizers, and it has a bunch of different oscillators, and one of them is just white noise. So I've set the oscillator up on that, and it's basically just playing the white noise signal the whole time. Now obviously you don't want the signal coming through the whole time, you only want the signal to come through as this sort of false reverb effect. So it's really quite simple. On the channel, after the operator, you need to set up a gate, which you can find in the live devices over on the left hand side. So you set up a gate channel, and then really it's the side chain on the gate which allows the snares that are playing to trigger the signal to come through. So without a trigger from the channel, and in this case it's this channel here, which is one of these snares that's playing, without the signal coming through from that, you won't hear the white noise come through. So if you watch, you can see, if I change this to something else, now I've changed it to something which, I actually have two playing, but you can hear it's not coming through because there's no trigger coming from the snare. So there you go. Every time that sound plays, it triggers the gate, and that lets the white noise come out. So that's not really the only sort of thing which then shapes the characteristic of how you're going to make that reverb sound come through. It's really down to three things. It's down to the threshold of the gate, which is basically the level at which that sound is triggered. So let's say it wasn't a snare, let's say it was a vocal, and somebody sings a part of a vocal very quietly and they sing some parts really loudly. If I set the threshold for the gate up here, now all those quiet parts they sing that don't have much level to them aren't going to trigger the gate because they're going to be down here, and they're not going to pass this threshold point here, which is what's then going to allow the sound to come through. Now with a snare is obviously quite a loud sound anyway, so it's going to go all the way to the top. So pretty much anywhere where you have the threshold, at some point it will trigger the gate to open and the white noise to start coming through. But the further down you have it, and we're talking like really a tiny amount of time here, we're talking like milliseconds, but the further down you have the gate, as soon as the sound plays, then it triggers the gate. If you have it all the way down at the bottom. If you have it closer to the top, then it takes a couple milliseconds more for the gate to trigger because the sound has to reach that point of loudness right up at the top so that it will trigger the noise to come through. Then these two parameters here are the other things which affect the sound. I'm just going to turn off the second one. Right, okay, so these two parameters here are the other two which help you shape the white noise into the way that you want it so that it sounds like this false reverb effect. Again, the attack is kind of like an extension of what I was just talking about here with the threshold. Obviously the attack is the parameter by which the sound sort of comes through, starts to come through, and whether it comes through quickly or slowly is dependent on where your attack is set. If you've got a slow attack, a fast attack, then the sound will come through straight away. If you have a longer attack, then the sound takes longer to come through, and it will sort of have more of a faded in effect. And that's really what you want when you're doing this. If I set the attack, that's coming through, should be, if I wasn't doing it on the wrong one. If you set your attack really fast, then the white noise is coming through straight away. As soon as that gate is triggering the snare to open up the sound, it's coming through straight away. The more you have this coming through, there you go. If I set it to 150 milliseconds, now 150 milliseconds is longer than the actual length of that whole snare play. So the sound doesn't have any opportunity to come through at all. So if I set it somewhere around here, then it's not going to come through at its fullest extent until 2.14 milliseconds after the gate's triggered. And that's what you want, to get it to sound natural, because if you think of a reverb, you want it to come in as the sound sort of goes through itself and then reverbs out. Like, so if you clap in a hallway, you want the sound to come come through and then be there once you've finished clapping. Obviously the reverb, depending on the size of the place you're standing in, carries on. So you want the sound to, you want the reverb to come through as the snare plays through, not as it comes in. You don't want the white noise to just come straight in, you want it to come in as the sound sort of goes through itself. Then really, I think this is the most important parameter regarding how to make it sound natural. Well, not natural, but the release is basically after the sound is finished. So once the trigger sound, which is the snare, once that's not playing anymore, so once we've gone past this point here and the sound isn't physically playing anymore, the release will tell the gate how long to stay open. So again, if I set the release down to nothing or to a really fast time, then once we get to this point here and the sound isn't physically playing anymore, then the gate's just going to close shut and you won't hear any more of the white noise come through. So it's effectively like it being off. But the more we turn up this release, then the more, when we're at this point in time past where the sound's finished playing, we're going to get that noise coming through still. So and you can hear it getting longer and longer. Yeah, so, and that's what I was saying about, that's the characteristic of this kind of sort of beat pattern really, is that these snares have big long reverb tails, and so it's really important that if you're going to do this kind of trick, then you have that long release, because otherwise, you know, you're not really getting the big spacious effect that you're trying to get from what would be a reverb, but in this case, it's just white noise imitating a reverb. Okay, so those are the three sort of main parameters about that which are important. The other thing that's important to do is, obviously, white noise is the sum of all frequencies. So, you know, any frequency within your range of hearing, which goes from 20 hertz to like 20,000 hertz, white noise is a combination of all those things at once. So we're using this technique to imitate the reverb of a snare. Now the snare that we've got here starts playing at around sort of 200 hertz. So for the reverb to have any frequencies in it below that isn't really consistent with what the sound that you're trying to emulate is. So I've literally just stuck a low cut EQ onto the end of it, because that way nothing below the range of where the snare's actually playing is going to come through in this sort of false reverb, and it just makes the sound more consistent. Because otherwise, if you don't have this EQ on, then you've got all these frequencies which are lower coming through from the white noise, and they're not there in the snare, and then all of a sudden they're there in what your ears perceive to be as this reverb tail. Then it just doesn't sound very sort of natural. I know sounding natural is kind of a weird expression when you're making music which is sort of almost entirely synthesized, but still, it's, you know, you're going for as much of a natural effect as you possibly can do. So I've set up 2 of these sort of false reverb effects, and the reason I've done this, again, it's purely stylistic rather than actually being an engineering technique. One of them just has a slightly shorter release time than the other, so every 4th snare in the pattern has a longer tail to it, basically. And rather than, I mean, there are other ways that you could do that. You could automate the release time to go up and down, but really it seems to me to be more of a pain than just setting up a duplicate channel to do the same thing, and just having the longer release there to make every 4th snare have this longer reverb tail. So if you listen to this one, it's kind of finished by there. If we listen to this one, again, it's not quite finished by the time that the next snare plays. But again, like I said, it's just that's stylistic really, rather than anything else.